Most people spend their lives running from pain. They complain about how unfair life is, how hard the journey feels, how impossible their dreams seem. But here's the problem: every complaint makes you weaker. Every complaint steals the energy that could have been used to build something extraordinary. Steve Jobs didn't escape his pain. He embraced it. And that's what turned him into one of the most powerful creators of our time. Pain is one of the most misunderstood forces in human life. Most of us see it as something to run from, something to numb, something to fight against. But here's the paradox: pain is not your enemy. Pain is the teacher you've been avoiding. Steve Jobs understood this deeply, and it became one of the darkest, but most powerful lessons of his life. When Jobs was fired from Apple in 1985, it wasn't just a business decision, it was personal devastation. Imagine this: you build something from scratch. You pour your soul into it. You put your name, your blood, your sweat, and your entire vision into it, only to be told you're no longer good enough to lead it. Most people would have collapsed under the weight of that rejection. Most people would have complained, blamed, and buried themselves in excuses. But Jobs didn't. That pain, as brutal as it was, became his mentor. He once said, "I didn't see it then, but getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." What does that mean? It means that pain stripped away the illusions he had about success. It tore down the ego, the comfort, the sense of invincibility he had built. And in that tearing down, pain opened up the space for him to learn again, to rediscover who he really was. Jobs treated pain like a sculptor. He didn't run from it. He let it cut away the excess, the unnecessary, the weak parts of himself. And with every strike, pain was carving him into a sharper, more focused, more creative force. That's why pain is never an enemy. It is a process of refinement. It's like fire burning away the impurities in metal. You can fight the fire, or you can step into it and let it forge you. Think about your own life. How often have you let pain stop you? How often have you let failure convince you that you weren't good enough? We've all done it. We've all sat in the corner of self-pity, asking, "Why me?" But the truth is, pain isn't asking why you. Pain is asking, "What now?" It's asking, "What are you going to do with this?" Jobs chose to answer that question with action. Instead of complaining, he built NextT. Instead of sulking, he invested in Pixar. And while the world thought he had been broken, he was actually being rebuilt into someone even stronger. That's the power of pain when you stop seeing it as an enemy. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you humility. It teaches you clarity. You see, comfort never teaches. Success rarely teaches. But pain teaches everything. It shows you who your real friends are. It reveals what you truly value. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you would rather ignore. Pain asks you to grow in ways that nothing else can. And that is why Jobs leaned into it. He understood that greatness isn't born in ease. It's born in difficulty. It's born in rejection. It's born in failure. He used to say that sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick, and the only thing that matters is that you don't lose faith. That's not just a quote. It's survival wisdom. Because when the brick hits, pain arrives. And when pain arrives, you have two choices: complain or learn. The reason pain is the greatest teacher is that it strips away the false layers of your identity. Jobs didn't learn who he truly was during the glory days of Apple's rise. He learned who he was when everything was taken from him. He learned who he was when his own company didn't want him anymore. And from that lesson, he came back with a vision that didn't just save Apple. It changed the entire world of technology. Pain forced him to step back and ask, "Why am I really here? What am I meant to create? What is my purpose beyond the applause, beyond the title, beyond the position?" Those are questions you can only hear when the noise of comfort is gone, and pain has a way of silencing that noise. Most people think pain is punishment, but Jobs proved that pain is preparation. It's preparing you for something bigger than you imagined. It's preparing you for resilience. It's preparing you for clarity of purpose. It's preparing you for the weight of the future that only you can carry. So when Jobs stood years later on that stage, introducing the iMac, then the iPod, then the iPhone, people saw triumph. But what they didn't see was the invisible teacher behind him, pain. Without that teacher, he would not have had the humility to start over, the clarity to innovate again, the hunger to push past failure. Pain was shaping every word, every product, every decision. And here's the secret: you have that same teacher waiting for you. Every setback you face, every rejection, every betrayal, every failure, it's not here to break you. It's here to teach you. It's here to show you who you really are. And if you stop running from it, if you stop complaining, if you allow it to do its work, it will give you gifts you cannot imagine. Complaints are the language of the powerless. They are the anthem of those who have surrendered to circumstances, the soundtrack of people who have given up control. When you complain, you are telling the world that life is happening to you, instead of you happening to life. Steve Jobs despised this mindset. For him, complaining was wasted energy that could have been transformed into creation. And that's the dark but liberating lesson here. Stop complaining, start creating. Jobs faced humiliation, rejection, and betrayal in ways most of us can't even imagine. Being fired from Apple, the very company he built, could have turned him bitter. He had every excuse to complain. He could have written a book about unfair boards, ungrateful colleagues, or the injustice of being stripped of his own vision. But did he? No. Instead, he poured every ounce of that frustration into building again. NextT wasn't just a company, it was a statement. It was Jobs declaring to the world, "You can take away my title, you can take away my company, but you cannot take away my ability to create." That is the ultimate answer to pain creation. Complaining is noise. Creation is a signal. When you complain, no one listens, not really. People hear the words, but they don't feel the impact. But when you create, when you take that same frustration and turn it into action, suddenly the world pays attention. Jobs never begged the world to see his worth. He showed it. He didn't whine about being underestimated. He built products that made underestimation impossible. Think about the energy you spend complaining. Every sigh, every rant, every conversation where you unload about how unfair things are. It takes effort. And what does it give you back? Nothing. You end up drained, weaker, more hopeless. But if you redirected even a fraction of that energy into building, into creating, into pushing forward, you would transform your reality. That's the philosophy Jobs lived by. At Pixar, for instance, Jobs invested not only money but belief. The company was struggling, on the verge of collapse. Anyone else would have complained about the market, the timing, the risks. But Jobs didn't. He believed in the potential of storytelling through technology. He believed in creation. And from that belief came Toy Story, a film that rewrote the history of animation. That wasn't born out of comfort. That was born out of the refusal to complain. Jobs knew something most people forget. Complaints never change the future. Complaints lock you into the present. But creation bends the future. Creation rewrites the script. Creation builds worlds that didn't exist before. That's why he obsessed over design, over details, over pushing his team to deliver something magical. Because in his mind, the only answer to problems was not talking about them endlessly. It was building the solution. Ask yourself this: how many times have you told the same story about how unfair life is? How many times have you repeated the same complaint? as if saying it one more time will make it better. It won't. Complaints do not heal wounds. Complaints do not build empires. Complaints do not change destiny. Only creation does. Jobs once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why even bother?" That wasn't just a catchy line. It was his entire operating system. He didn't waste bandwidth on what couldn't be changed. He obsessed over what could be created. Every time he was confronted with a wall, he didn't stand there and cry about it. He asked, "How do I go through it, around it? Or better yet, how do I invent something that makes the wall irrelevant?" That's the difference between those who complain and those who create. Think of the iPhone. Before it existed, people complained about phones being clunky, ugly, and inconvenient. Jobs didn't join in on those complaints. He created a device so intuitive, so revolutionary, that it silenced the complaints forever. The world didn't need more people pointing out the problem. It needed someone willing to build the solution. And Jobs chose to be that someone. The deeper truth here is that complaints keep you trapped in the past, while creation pulls you into the future. Every complaint is a story about what already happened, about what someone else did, about how unfair circumstances were. But creation is about what you will do next. It is about claiming ownership of the next chapter, no matter how unfair the last one was. This is why Jobs was relentless, sometimes even brutal, in demanding results. He didn't want to hear excuses. He didn't want to hear why something was hard. He wanted to see the product, the solution, the creation, because he knew that every moment spent complaining was a moment stolen from progress. So here's the question. Are you spending your life complaining? Or are you spending your life creating? When Jobs stood at the crossroads of humiliation and possibility, he chose creation. When the world said he was finished, he chose creation. And in the end, creation gave him back not just Apple, not just success, but immortality in the form of ideas that continue to shape our lives today. Comfort is the enemy of progress. It whispers to you, telling you that things are good enough, that you don't need to push any further, that you can stay where you are. But greatness never comes from comfort. Steve Jobs understood this at the deepest level. He believed that discomfort wasn't just necessary, it was the birthplace of every innovation that mattered. When Jobs built Apple, he created a culture of discomfort, not because he enjoyed making people uneasy, but because he knew that pushing past the limits of comfort forced people to see possibilities they would have never considered. He demanded designs that seemed impossible, interfaces that no one had ever imagined, and perfection that drove his teams to exhaustion. To outsiders, this looked like cruelty, but to Jobs, it was the only way to awaken brilliance. Think about the Macintosh. At the time, the idea of a personal computer with a graphical interface, simple enough for anyone to use, was radical. It wasn't just difficult, it was uncomfortable for engineers who were used to thinking in terms of raw code, numbers, and mechanical logic. Jobs forced them into discomfort. He told them that the machine had to feel like a bicycle for the mind, elegant and intuitive, something a child could pick up and explore. That demand made his team stretch beyond what they thought was possible. And out of that discomfort came a revolution in computing. Discomfort breaks patterns. It interrupts routines. It forces you to leave behind the safety of what you know and step into the uncertainty of what could be. That's why it feels so unbearable. But in that very unease lies the seed of transformation. Jobs knew that if you let people stay comfortable, they would give you ordinary results. But if you place them in the fire of discomfort, they might just deliver the extraordinary. The iPod was another product born out of discomfort. Music players already existed, but they were clunky, ugly, and uninspiring. People were comfortable with them, even though they were flawed. Jobs refused to accept that. He told his team they had to create a device that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. Something beautiful, simple, and seamless. The engineers protested. They said it couldn't be done. Jobs didn't care. He pushed them into discomfort, stripping away excuses until they realized that the only option was to create the impossible. And they did. The iPod didn't just change music, it changed culture. The truth is, innovation always feels like pain before it feels like progress. When you are stretched, when you are asked to give more than you think you can, when you are pulled out of your safe zone, your instinct is to resist. But resistance is a sign that growth is happening. Jobs thrived in that space. He built his career by living inside discomfort, by refusing to accept what was comfortable, by demanding more not just from himself, but from everyone around him. He was relentless because he knew comfort breeds complacency, and complacency is death for creativity. If you want to innovate, you cannot settle for what already works. You must step into what doesn't, into what hurts, into what challenges everything you know. That's where the breakthroughs live. Jobs once said that design is not just how something looks, but how it works. That philosophy came from his willingness to live in discomfort. Because making something truly intuitive is not easy. It requires tearing apart assumptions, questioning traditions, and starting over again and again. It requires sitting in the frustration of not knowing the answer and staying there long enough for something new to emerge. Most people run from that space. They want the shortcut, the easy path, the certainty. But Jobs believed that certainty was the enemy of creativity. He thrived on uncertainty because it forced new thinking. Discomfort kept him hungry. Discomfort kept him curious. Discomfort kept him dangerous. And here's the paradox. The very discomfort that feels unbearable in the moment becomes the source of joy later. Every Apple product that stunned the world came with stories of sleepless nights, endless arguments, and impossible demands. But when the product was finally unveiled, when it worked, when people held it in their hands and their eyes lit up, that discomfort transformed into pride. That's the gift of discomfort. It turns pain into purpose. So ask yourself this: when was the last time you felt truly uncomfortable? When was the last time you pushed yourself beyond what you thought you could do? If you can't remember, you may be too comfortable. And if you're too comfortable, you may be starving your own potential. Jobs lived his life in the tension between what was and what could be. He chose discomfort again and again because he knew it was the only way to create something worth remembering. He didn't accept average. He didn't accept the ordinary. He didn't accept comfort. He demanded the impossible, and in doing so, he made the impossible real. Pain is not weakness. Pain is energy. Pain is raw power waiting to be transformed. The difference between those who rise and those who fall is not the presence of pain. It's what they do with it. Steve Jobs lived through more pain than most people realize. And instead of letting it destroy him, he used it as fuel. That's the darkest and most powerful lesson of all your pain is your power. Jobs was abandoned at birth, rejected before he even had a chance to understand what rejection meant. That early wound could have defined him. He could have spent his life trapped in bitterness, blaming the world for what it had taken from him. But instead, he chose to see it differently. That abandonment planted in him a hunger, a need to prove himself, a drive to create a family not by blood, but by vision. That pain became his first source of power. Later, when he was forced out of Apple, it was another kind of abandonment. Imagine being told you were no longer needed in the very place you had poured your soul into. Most people would have collapsed under that pain. Jobs didn't. He turned it into fire. He built NextT. He rebuilt himself. He returned to Apple, not as the same man who had left, but as someone forged by rejection, someone sharper, someone unstoppable. That pain wasn't a curse, it was preparation. Pain gives you two choices. It can chain you down, or it can launch you forward. Jobs chose to let it launch him. He used every wound, every betrayal, every setback as fuel to push further than before. That's why his story resonates, not because he avoided pain, but because he harnessed it. Look at how he battled illness. Even when his body betrayed him, even when cancer threatened to take everything, he didn't surrender. He kept building, kept speaking, kept showing up. Every keynote, every launch, every product he introduced in those years carried the invisible weight of pain behind it. Yet he never made it about the suffering. He made it about the creation. He turned his private pain into a public legacy that continues to shape the world. Pain is power because it strips away the unnecessary. When you are in pain, you discover what really matters. Jobs understood that deeply. He didn't waste time chasing what was meaningless. He focused on what counted. He built products that mattered. He lived a life that mattered. He didn't let pain make him smaller. He let it make him clearer. Ask yourself this: how many times have you treated your pain as an enemy? How many times have you told yourself that pain was proof you weren't good enough, proof you were cursed, proof that life was unfair? The truth is, pain is not proof of weakness. It is proof that you are alive, that you are being stretched, that you are being prepared for something larger than yourself. Jobs once said that remembering he would die soon was the most important tool he ever encountered for making decisions. Why? Because the pain of mortality stripped away fear. It stripped away ego. It stripped away the illusion that he had anything to lose. That pain became liberation. It allowed him to think bigger, to risk more, to create without compromise. Every painful moment in his life was fuel. That's why he didn't just build companies. He built movements. Apple was never about computers. It was about challenging the status quo, about thinking differently, about giving ordinary people tools that felt extraordinary. That kind of vision doesn't come from comfort. It comes from wounds. It comes from scars. It comes from turning pain into power. And this is the choice in front of you right now. Every pain you carry, betrayals, failures, losses, rejections, can either be the weight that breaks you or the fire that builds you. Steve Jobs chose fire. He decided to let pain sharpen him, not soften him. He chose to turn rejection into resilience, abandonment into motivation, and illness into a sense of urgency. He didn't run from it. He embraced it. And because of that, his pain became his greatest source of power. Life will test you. It will give you pain. It will strip away your comfort. It will push you into places where complaining feels easier than creating. But remember, this pain is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Complaining will never build your future, but creating will. Discomfort is not punishment. It is the birthplace of innovation. And the pain you carry, the very thing you think will break you, is in fact your greatest power. Steve Jobs did not become who he was because his path was easy. He became who he was because he stopped running from pain, stopped wasting energy on complaints, and instead, he embraced discomfort, turning his pain into fuel. That is the lesson he leaves behind. Greatness is not born in comfort, it is forged in struggle. So the next time life hurts, the next time you feel the weight of rejection, failure, or fear pressing down on you, don't complain. Don't escape. Lean into it. Let it teach you. Let it sharpen you. Let it give you the clarity and the fire to create something the world cannot ignore. Because in the end, your pain is not a weakness. It is the power that will make you unstoppable.